Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, a data expert breaks down the basics of data centers as new ones are built across Wisconsin.
I think data centers are at the intersection of many issues that have people's attention and also includes a lot of themes that people are simultaneously excited and worried about.
We'll speak with Deidre Irwin, a Wisconsinite heading to the Winter Olympics to compete in the biathlon with Team USA.
It is just, to me, the most interesting, perfect sport that I could have ever gotten into. It's all endurance plus the huge puzzle piece of precision rifle marksmanship that really keeps me so intrigued every day I get to train.
Plus, a survivor of a Native American boarding school shares his story. All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us. Data centers are large, often nondescript buildings that house industrial-scale computer servers. Those servers connect us to social media, content streaming, cloud storage, and much more. Now, even larger data centers to help power artificial intelligence are being built and proposed here in Wisconsin. With them comes concerns about the impact on the environment and our power grid and what it could mean for utility bills. Kyle Cramner is the director of the Data Science Institute at UW-Madison. He joins WUWM's Eddie Morales to give a data guy's take on the AI boom and why companies like Microsoft, Vantage, and Meta are bringing data centers to Wisconsin.
Data centers are basically very large buildings. They kind of look like warehouses, but they're filled with computers and different kind of like internet networking equipment and things like that inside of them. They power essentially almost all internet and digital services that you ever might encounter. So for instance, if you hear that something is in the cloud, actually it's very much on the ground and in one of these data centers. So that includes search engines like Google, your email, messaging, cloud-based tools that you might use, for instance, to make a Christmas calendar or, back up your photos, Netflix for streaming services, all the social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, X, etc. Essentially everything that you encounter on the internet. And it also includes, increasingly importantly, all of the AI services for the most part. So things like ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, and some of these tools that are now being used to be able to do AI images and videos. All of that, for the most part, is being housed and served from these data centers.
If you could provide somewhat of a timeline for data centers, how have they changed in size and scope? Also, how have they changed based on what they do and what resources that requires?
For the most part, data centers, have been around in some form or another since the beginning of the internet. And so as internet has grown, the need for those kinds of things have grown. I think you saw a real change when something like Google first started and search. They really needed to be able to save all that data and respond to all of those search queries very quickly. And then as people started to, for instance, back up things in the cloud, you needed to be able to store more and more of that data and to have backups for it. So you started seeing a proliferation of data centers. When you had things like Facebook take off, now you start having lots of people sharing images and videos of their family and things like that. So that was really one of the places where data centers, the need for them started to grow. And then with the transition of things like Netflix going from mailing DVDs to streaming, and all of the streaming services, the data centers grew and grew. And I think now AI is kind of the new kid on the block that is also housed in data centers, but is also very resource intensive. So you kind of need more computing capacity, and AI is just growing so fast that people are very bullish on building out more and more data centers because they see that demand coming.
Mm-hmm. And data centers have been in the news a lot lately. Why is that?
I think data centers are at the intersection of many issues that have people's attention and also includes a lot of themes that people are simultaneously excited and worried about. So, for instance, artificial intelligence is one of them. The data center build out is surging largely because there's a increased demand for AI. Obviously, companies are very excited about AI. You hear it on the news and in advertisements constantly. But also people are worried about this new technology and what it means, and there's a whole host of questions. So it's tied up with issues around AI, but it's also tied up into issues around sustainability. Data centers use a lot of energy and water. And so it does feel in opposition to many of the kind of environmental or climate goals that many people have been pushing for the last decade. And then there's the economy. So data centers, on one hand, they represent economic growth and jobs, but people are also worried about their electric bills going up and the affordability crisis. And also, when you connect it back to AI, there's excitement about the potential gains in efficiency and the positive impacts of AI on the economy. But people are also worried about a changing workforce and that AI may take jobs away. So I think the other part is just that's as they're building data centers, it's leading to a lot of community engagement and debate. And that sometimes leads to some drama. And so it's getting a lot of coverage in the news, these different local discussions. And, sometimes that's framed as a kind of big tech versus community, sort of David versus Goliath feel to it. But really, it's a very complicated topic. It hits on issues of tax incentives and impact on the tax base and environmental issues and land use. So it's a really complicated topic. And that's why there's, debate on the topic.
What are arguments for and against data centers, and is there a middle ground or a compromise?
Well, the arguments for, one of the simplest thing is just that there's a lot of demand for, our digital lives, and that certainly includes artificial intelligence, but not only AI. There's streaming of videos, and increasingly our lives are digital. So there's just the demand, basically. The other argument that's for building these out is because there's stories of creating jobs, and in some cases creating high-paying jobs, and having meaningful contributions to the local GDP and tax base. And there's also an issue that's kind of tricky that for people that want to see renewable energy, maybe the demand for AI and the energy around it, it will be the thing that incentivizes the development of new renewable energy sources. So those are generally the arguments for. The arguments against, I think one of the most visible are the environmental costs, and whether that's just because it's maybe a not very beautiful building that's taking up as kind of an eyesore, or if it's because of the electricity usage and water usage, which are big issues. And then there's also, in terms of the pushback about, are the high-paying jobs really sort of worth it? Are you creating enough of them? Are they going to persist? Is it going to be a sustainable economic incentive for those communities? And then when you start getting into issues like taxes and tax incentives to, that many states are competing to bring these data centers to their area, is that cutting too deeply into the tax revenue and those kinds of things? So those are some of the arguments for and against.
Are you able to put into perspective what those energy costs and those resources are? Is there like a comparison that you'd be able to use to help people better understand that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the energy use is that people are talking about is very, very large. So you're talking about things that are like on the order of like doubling the amount of stress on the electrical grid. So and you're talking about water use. It depends heavily on what kinds of technologies are used to cool these data centers. It's not like the water goes away, but you're pulling water from somewhere, you're using that to cool off these data centers, and then it basically evaporates into the air, sort of like when you see other large heating and cooling units around, for instance, hospitals and things. But the amount of water that's going through the system can be similar to like what a small city might do if you use the so-called evaporative cooling techniques. Some of the big data centers, for instance, that Microsoft is pushing for, use what's called closed loop cooling systems. The demands on water are much smaller, but you can run into other issues and it doesn't completely go away. But the short answer is the amount of energy use and the amount of water use is very substantial and at the scale of like what we do as a society. So it's like you can talk about doubling the amount of electricity, which is almost unfathomable.
And so you mentioned some of the arguments for and against. What are some examples, if you can cite any, of sort of middle ground? What's like a best case scenario for making sure that communities aren't impacted negatively by the presence of a data center?
Yeah, I think that there are many really interesting models that are being developed about trying to, essentially it's about aligning incentives and trying to make sure that there's an overall positive impact on communities. And you have a very complicated set of issues that you're trying to balance. So the issues around tax incentives, what's going to happen to the price of electricity, how is that going to hit consumers? If you're bringing in a large data center, could they be making other kind of commitments to that local community? So, for instance, Vantage Data Centers has some kind of interesting projects that they're doing in Wisconsin with Milwaukee County, and it's related to the kind of Lighthouse campus in Port Washington. That partnership includes things, including partnerships with United Way, partnerships with food pantries, and various things like that. So exactly how that plays out and how the economic returns on what these data centers are providing are shared with the communities is kind of where the rubber hits the road, I think.
Would you consider Wisconsin to be a hotbed for data centers?
Yes, I don't think it's just, it's not just Wisconsin, but the Midwest kind of generally has many good features for data centers. So these include things like what's the price of electricity? There's also issues of water. If you do have a lot of water needs, sticking it in a desert is probably not the best idea. So the Midwest is doing pretty well with that. And there's adjacency to the Great Lakes and et cetera. But, there are still hitting, issues in terms of aquifers and things. So there's still plenty of things to worry about. The other part about why the Midwest is sort of a hotbed is when you put up these data centers, you also need access to a lot of infrastructure. And so that includes things like transmission lines for electricity, but also includes things like fiber optic cables to connect this thing to the internet, because that's what it's there for, essentially. And so you want to try to co-locate these data centers where you see that kind of infrastructure. And then there's basically, price of land and things like that. So all of those issues are relevant, and for many reasons, the Midwest is attractive.
Some people are concerned about the evolving tech and the presence of these data centers not being needed and suddenly changing or evolving and then becoming obsolete. So will data centers become obsolete?
That's a good question. I think that, it's something to be worried about. My short answer is probably not. I think that if the data centers only served AI and you're worried about an AI bubble, then, that I think the worry that the data centers might become obsolete is much higher. But the data centers are very multi-purpose, and they're serving up all sorts of aspects of our digital lives. So I think the investments in the data centers are going to have a long life, and they won't really be obsolete. The technology that goes inside of the data centers is maybe a different story. The actual computers themselves definitely will kind of depreciate, and some of them can be very expensive with the kind of fancy chips and things like GPUs and et cetera. Those definitely will become obsolete in a few years. And so their equipment that's inside the data centers likely will become obsolete, but the data center themselves probably not. Whether or not we're building more than we need is a different question.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't ask or that we haven't talked about?
So I think that the issues around data centers are so complex and intertwined that it really requires some nuance and a group of experts, really, and trusted experts. And so I think that it's a place where the value of, for instance, the university is really clear. You have people that are experts from the economic issues to the civil engineering issues, the impact on the electrical grid, impacts on society, the impacts on the environment. And I think it's an excellent opportunity for universities to really step up and try to be a trusted partner with the state of Wisconsin in helping navigate these really complicated issues. And that, goes beyond just data centers, but also includes things like how we navigate the arrival of artificial intelligence and its impacts on society. And there having, some trusted partner with deep expertise is incredibly valuable. And so I'm very happy to be asked to join today and talk to you.
Kyle Cramner is the director of the Data Science Institute at UW-Madison. He spoke with WUWM's Eddie Morales. You can find much more coverage on data centers coming to Wisconsin at wuwm.com. Don't forget, Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen to us whenever you like. Find it where you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. Across the U.S., thousands of Native American children went through forced assimilation in boarding schools. Later in the show, we'll hear from a Wisconsin survivor. But first, we hear from an Olympian and fellow Wisconsinite, Deidre Irwin, ahead of the upcoming Winter Games, where she'll compete for Team USA in the biathlon. That's coming up next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. The Milano Cortina 2026 Winter Olympic Games are coming up in February. Athletes from across the globe will be performing together on the highest platform their sport can reach. It's an exciting time not just for the athletes who have trained incredibly hard to qualify, but for all of us watching from home. In this Winter Olympic Games, we have a fellow Wisconsinite to cheer on, Staff Sergeant Deidre Irwin. She's on Team USA competing in the biathlon and currently holds the best placement for an American athlete in the event with her 7th place finish from her Olympic debut in Beijing. Irwin is from Pulaski, Wisconsin, and is also part of the Army's World-Class Athlete Program. To share more about how she got into the biathlon and her outlook on the upcoming Olympics, she joins me now. Deidre, welcome to Lake Effect. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're from Pulaski, Wisconsin. So can you share a bit more about your Midwestern roots and how you were first introduced to the biathlon? Because this wasn't your first sport of choice, right?
Definitely not. I grew up in Pulaski, Wisconsin. It's about 20, 30 minutes outside of Green Bay now with those really nice highways they built since I lived there. It's a small rural farm community, most known for Pulaski polka days, polka music and really good bakery downtown that I love, making good donuts and punchkis and pierogi, all that stuff. So I grew up in that area, mostly with dreams of becoming an Olympic runner, an Olympic track star. But as life would have it, I didn't get what I wanted. And, as my injuries in track and field and cross country started coming up, I got introduced to Nordic skiing to help me stay in shape and kind of reduce the impact on my body. And it has become a lifestyle for me ever since. So when I was 16 years old, I got introduced to the Ashwaubenon Nordic Ski Club based out of Ashwaubenon, Wisconsin. And I've been Nordic skiing ever since. I went to college at Michigan Technological University up in the UP. Really enjoyed the snowstorms there and did cross-country running, track and field, and Nordic skiing for my 5 years that I was there. And then after college, I pursued a little bit of professional skiing out in Sun Valley, Idaho, with a team out there. And right when I was thinking about retiring, one of my best friends told me I should try biathlon. And I kind of didn't really know what to expect when she kind of sent me this application for a talent ID camp, but it turned into, let's give it a try for a year. It's now 8.5 years later, going to my second Olympics. And it is just, to me, the most interesting, perfect sport that I could have ever gotten into. It's all endurance plus the huge puzzle piece of precision rifle marksmanship that, really keeps me so intrigued every day I get to train, because it's never perfect. There's always some wind, there's snow, there's something, and you have to find that perfect balance between your fitness and your focus.
Yeah, let's get into that a little more. You call the biathlon a, quote, complicated, unforgiving, and addicting sport. So for anyone unfamiliar, you can just briefly explain what the sport entails and why it grips you so tightly, especially kind of coming into it somewhat accidentally, right? Like not intentionally.
Definitely. So it's a combination of Nordic skiing, specifically skate skiing, and rifle marksmanship. So I ski with a rifle as a backpack. And we'll ski a loop anywhere from 2 to 3K for the women. And we'll stop and shoot prone in the middle of our race. That's when you're laying down on your stomach. We're shooting a target 50 meters away. We have 5 bullets for 5 targets. Hopefully you hit them all and you get to go back on course. But if you don't, you actually have to do penalty loops. And so you have to ski even more depending on how many shots you missed. And then you go back out on course, and then you come back into the same range, and now you have to shoot standing targets. They're a little bit bigger, but you're a little bit more vulnerable in a standing position. The wind can be a little more aggressive, and you have to try and do the same thing. 5 bullets for 5 targets. And so hopefully you hit them all, you get to go and finish the race. If not, you're in the penalty loop. So that's the simplest way to explain it of, if you're the fastest skier out there, the fastest and most precise shooter, you're winning the race.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that make any race a variability, right? Like you're never going to have the same performance twice. Is that part of the addicting nature of it?
Definitely. I mean, you can go one week, I think, just me starting out this season, one week I clean a sprint and I'm in 17th place. 1 week later, I have the same exact performance, shoot 10 for 10 again, and I'm in 10th place. And so you have these variabilities of what was my ski speed that day? How long did I stay on the range to hit all 10 of those targets? And how were my competitors that day too? One of my old teammates, I think she described it perfectly, is especially at the Olympics, you have about 50 women on the start line who could win the race that day. And I think that's why biathlon is so exciting to watch, because you can have the fastest skier out there on the course just destroying all of us, but if they can't hit any targets that day, they're not winning a race. So I think that's finding that balance in biathlon of, how fast can I be? How precise can I be? How focused can I be? Where to push, where to hold back. And that's, I think, the addicting part too, as an athlete, is you're in the race and you're having all of these thoughts while you're skiing to make sure you're skiing fast. And then you have to get on the range and flip that focus to immediately be as accurate as possible. And I have about 30 seconds to do it if I want to be competitive, and if I want to medal today. And then for me, that's, I think, the most addicting thing is I started out the season shooting an individual and I missed 4 shots because I clicked wrong into the wind and there were some wind gusts, and that's how I started my race. And I still had 3 more shooting bouts that I had to kind of regain my focus throughout the 45 minutes that I was racing to come back into the range and make sure I'm hitting targets and doing the job for the rest of the race. So it's that very addicting, when you miss, you want to kind of go back and you want to do it right. You're like, no, I know I could do this. We train so much all year long for 4 to 8. I've been training as an endurance athlete since I was in 5th grade. So it's kind of that addicting part of it is you want to find and perfect as much of it as you can.
Part of your athletic journey involves the military. You're in the Army's world-class athlete program, which is a long-standing tradition of soldier athletes competing in their sport of choice. So can you share more about your journey from Pulaski to the military?
Definitely, that was another element of my athletic career that kind of just wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. Same with joining biathlon. I just sort of found it and then found a way to make it work. And I think the same thing happened with me for the military. I joined biathlon and I learned about the National Guard biathlon program based in Jericho, Vermont. And, student loans, I was turning 26, so I was losing my health care from my parents for, coming up. And there was just a lot of life choices. And for me, signing a 6-year contract with the military was kind of a no-brainer. I could pursue this awesome athletic career, and I could pay my student loans, and I could have health benefits, and I could build this career outside of just being an athlete. And so for me, joining was so smart. And then after making the last Olympics and learning more about the world-class athlete program, that also was a really easy transition for me to represent such a high-level, talented program that has so many athletes spread across the U.S. in so many different sports. And I've been able to meet quite a few of them. And all of our stories are so inspirational and so unique. And it's such a great collaboration and team environment to be a part of as a U.S. soldier and as a soldier athlete in the program. So I've been incredibly lucky to be able to join the military and have not just a really successful athletic career, but also be able to know I have a professional career to go to when I do decide to stop being an athlete as a soldier, which I think is something that a lot of athletes don't necessarily get to have in tandem sometimes. You're either an athlete or you have a career. And for me, I'm able to have both of those because of the U.S. Army and the World Class Athlete Program.
I imagine there's a lot of logistics and mapping you have to do, right? Not just in training, but with this dual career as an athlete and a soldier. So you're technically a remote athlete in Vermont, but technically you're stationed in Colorado, right? So can you explain some of the logistics of how you manage these dual identities?
Yeah, I mean, we have an incredible support staff in Fort Carson, Colorado on the base. And so I'm in contact with them weekly so that they know where I'm at, where I'm racing. And I'm a platoon sergeant for some of the other soldier athletes too. So I'm helping manage some Nordic combined athletes, figure skater, the other biathletes that are on my team. And so there's a lot of, yeah, like you said, a lot of logistics and communication. But I think that's also a really cool thing to learn in the military. You're learning how to manage yourself. You're not just kind of wandering around. You have a lot of people behind you supporting you. We have nutritionists. We have, public affairs officers helping us with interviews. There's so many people behind the scenes at the World Class Athlete Program that really make being an athlete traveling internationally so much more reasonable and easy. Even though sometimes people are like, how do you balance both? So it's really just, communication and teamwork. And I think the World Class Athlete Program is full of amazing support staff that help it work out. Even though I am a remote athlete, I'm very connected to all of the staff we have in Fort Carson.
I'm going to take a moment to reintroduce you. I'm Audrey Nowakowski, and you're listening to Lake Effect. Today, I'm joined by Staff Sergeant Deidre Irwin, and she is on Team USA for the biathlon for the upcoming Winter Olympics. So with the biathlon, it's obviously a winter sport, but if you're not in a place with, it's maybe a warm season or you're traveling, it's the off season, what does your training look like when it's not winter all the time where you can actually be on skis?
Yeah, so we have these fancy contraptions called roller skis, which anybody in Wisconsin has probably seen me out there on the bug line in the Waukesha, Menominee Falls area on my roller skis, visiting my family. And so they're a really awesome summer training tool for us that gets us as close to Nordic skiing as possible. And so we have these little rubber wheels that allow us to go on asphalt, and we use the same poles, the same boots. And when we're in a place like Brillion, Wisconsin now that has a roller ski track connected to a biathlon range, we're actually able to do pretty much our entire sport on pavement and on a real shooting range. So that's kind of our main training tool, as close as we can get to the biathlon and skiing in the winter. But I do everything from mountain biking, gravel biking, road biking, hiking, running, paddleboarding, kayaking, just anything to kind of like build the cardiovascular system. And then my fiance has got me into golf too, which I've realized is a lot like shooting. And one of my teammates, she's a pretty much an amateur professional golfer, and it is crazy how much forgiveness and focus you need to have on the golf course, very similar to on the range. To get that ball to go where you want it to go. So we have a lot of different tools in our tool belt to kind of help us train for the endurance component and also the mental, precision shooting component that is biathlon.
All these different components you're talking about, I'm wondering, with all of your training, cross training, everything you do, all the people you've worked with, what are some of your best or favorite techniques to practice for preparation?
Definitely. I mean, we're actually in about an hour, our shooting coach is going through some visualization with us, which I think is going to be kind of, we lay in a dark room, close our eyes, kind of figure out what race we want to focus on or what we want our focus to be, and try to like work through how to feel those pressures and how to, what to think about when we're coming onto the range or while we're out skiing. And I've definitely really enjoyed using visualization as a tool to help me deal with some of those pressures or some of those fine tuning things that I want to work on that when I'm out on the course or out training, I don't necessarily have the time to really like sit there and look and like nitpick at. And so we use a lot of, visualization tools, meditation, and that's a tiny part of that. So like there's so many components. I mean, including nutrition. We have, a bunch of staff here that are constantly like, we have a snack table outside in the hallway just to make sure we're eating and hydrating well. So there's a lot of extra little components to outside of just the racing component and training component that we're always trying to focus on and optimize.
So, focusing on the Olympics here, you made your debut in Beijing, and those games were certainly a unique experience. And if anyone needs reminding, it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, so you didn't get the Olympic experience of crowds being able to see you compete. But you also had some major highs. You accomplished a historic 7th place finish at the Games, and it was a personal best. And also, it's the highest ever placement for an American athlete in this event, period. So, I'm just wondering, can you share some takeaways from this event for you? Like, even though it was abnormal, it was your first, so it's not like you had anything to compare it to, but you performed so well. So what are some of your takeaways from that experience?
I learned so much from those Olympics, and they were super unique. I think almost having less crowds and less media pressure and everything like that almost made it a little easier on me, it being my first Olympics. But definitely just going through the process of qualifying was so much, especially during a COVID season, that almost just when I made it and then I actually got to China and I was healthy and I knew I was racing, it was kind of like a weight just lifted. And I was like, okay, I'm here. Nobody expects anything. Let's just have fun. And then I did that result and blew everyone's mind, including my own, um, going from completely unranked to having, the 7th place finish. And so I think it was a huge confidence boost for me and also just like a reminder of, when I'm enjoying the environment I'm in and when I just sort of decide that, I already made it to the show, let's just do the work, that big, awesome things can happen. And so I think that's kind of the mentality I'm definitely trying to bring to this next Olympics is I think we're the only sport that hasn't medaled in the Winter Olympics for Team USA. So everybody's definitely wanting to know if we're going to get that medal and definitely trying to balance that pressure of like, yes, we want this, but also it's the Olympics, just try to enjoy the atmosphere. And this time my family's going to be there. And so definitely trying to handle those emotions of, seeing them in the crowd and having the ability to actually experience this Olympics with them is going to be amazing. And I think one big thing I learned from the 2022 Olympics was that you don't need an Olympic medal to have an Olympic moment. And for me, it was just amazing to be able to experience everything I was able to experience there. And if anybody follows my social media now or knows any of the other articles and stories, I also met my fiance there at the opening ceremonies. And that is another like super emotional, amazing thing that I get to look back on in the Beijing Olympics. So there were so many things at the Beijing Olympics that I'm so proud of. And I'm so happy I got to experience and really, take with me into my future. And I think going into this next Olympics, I want to make sure to savor those emotions and those moments, whether I have good races or not, being able to have not just my mom and my dad, but both of my brothers in the crowd at the Olympics is going to be amazing. They've never watched me race in Europe before. So I'm already like getting choked up thinking about, having them there. And, obviously we grew up together. They're my biggest fans. So it's going to be super emotional and super amazing. And I'm so excited for it.
Yeah, looking to the current games, how are you feeling? We're talking you're in Germany right now, getting ready for another race you have coming up. So how are you trying to balance this big impending event coming up, right? But you have so much to juggle in the meantime.
The World Cup is a tough field of racing on the women's side. I think, I had 2 mistakes on the range yesterday and I'm, placed in the 40s. And that just shows the difference between when I clean a race, I can get a top 10 and just those couple of tiny, milliseconds of mistakes on the range, bumps you all the way down. So I think trying to fine tune that, feeling fast, feeling prepared, feeling like I can, achieve results under pressure. I think that's kind of what everybody's focusing on now. They're definitely, nobody's trying to peak right now. I'll say that. You can see that on the course. Everybody's just definitely trying to start perfecting all the little parts so that when we get to the big stage, that's when we're all really, really performing. So I think I had a really great first trimester to start the season. I'm ranked in the top 30 in the world right now. So that's super exciting. And so I think I'm trying to just use that momentum and keep learning and not really adjusting too much, but really trying to figure out what mindset or, what can I focus on during a race or on the range that can really help me, when we have 60,000 people screaming in the stands at, in Italy when, and I'll be able to hear when the Italians are shooting because they get crazy. So, trying to be able to practice really focusing and really achieving, my best possible results when I get there.
Well, we'll be watching closely and cheering from you from Wisconsin. So for today, Deidre, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time and sharing more about your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking to people from Wisconsin. So, hi, family.
Staff Sergeant Deidre Irwin is a biathlete on Team USA. She'll be competing in her second Olympics in Italy next month. We'll take one last break, and when we come back, we'll hear the story of a Native American boarding school survivor from Wisconsin. Keep listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. In the 19th and 20th centuries, thousands of Native American children were sent to schools run by the federal government and churches. Many suffered abuse at the schools, where the goal was to erase indigenous cultures, starting with the community's children. Today, we hear the story of a Wisconsin survivor of one of these schools. His name is Dewey Shenandoah. When he was a child in the Menominee Reservation, he went to a Catholic school called St. Anthony's. Dewey shares his story and what it took to heal with WUWM reporter Jimmy Gutierrez and Eric Vaughn fellow Maria Peralta Ariano. A note to our listeners, this conversation includes descriptions of abuse.
Maria.
Yes, here we go.
We learned some Wisconsin history together last month.
Ooh, I hope you're talking about Dewey.
I'll behave. I'll behave.
Who could forget Dewey Shenandoah? So we did talk for a while, but that was because this man has lived 79 years and has seen a lot, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, including his experiences with what he called the Kill the Indian, Save the Man program, our state's brutal history with Indian boarding schools, which we found out Dewey was sent to in the first grade.
It was like a mixture of science, math, English, geography, and I was ready to excel because, hey man, my mother, she didn't raise no fool, man. She instructed me, you know what I mean? So it's like I had this insatiable desire to compete academically at that very early age. And here's the real big but. But that world changed at 7 years of age with that first beating that I got. That program, to Kill the Indian, Save the Man, that was designed to program us as indigenous people to fail in every aspect, every facet of society that we live in. And to some, it worked.
The wild thing is that these schools were everywhere for over 150 years in Wisconsin. The goal was clear: convert quote-unquote savages starting when they were kids. Indigenous cultures didn't fit into white society at the time, so they tried to erase it by any means necessary. Today, though, we know that knowing your history matters, dedicating days to recognize atrocities matter, and the stories of those who lived it and experienced it matters, because not all history is passed down.
When I grew up on a Menominee Reservation, we lived in the forest in northern Wisconsin, and the place was just simply beautiful. The whole show, the animals, the trees, the sunshine every day, and I got to enjoy that.
It sounds like a magical childhood, some of it at least, because something that Dewey was very clear on was that growing up on the reservation also meant growing up in abject poverty.
People would help each other out with deer meat, bear meat, animal stuff. And some had the foresight to see that other people were in need, so it was shared. The foods were shared amongst the people.
He was the youngest. He had an older brother and sister. His dad was a musician. He says his mom was compassionate and sensitive to tribal culture. But when he was small, maybe 6 years old, they divorced, which devastated his sister at the time.
She was going through the impact of the divorce of my mother and my father, and she reacted in a way that they didn't deem appropriate. So the the state stepped in. And the last thing I remember was I walked up partway to the stairs up to the first floor, and I looked around the corner and I could see my sister. She had her hands in the doorway, and the white woman, I say white woman with respect, she was pulling her by the hair. That was the last I saw of my sister, Doris. And what they did, they took her to Green Bay here, and they put her in an orphanage, Catholic orphanage here in Green Bay, which probably ain't in existence no more. And they did shock therapy on her, electroshock therapy, and it completely changed her.
Dude, that tape is so hard to hear.
What made it worse was that at this time, his sister was also in boarding school. I can imagine that she lost any peaceful place in her life to go. Not at school and not at home. She had no safe space. For Dewey, he was entering first grade and just about to head off to boarding school himself.
I walked in the building for the first time that time, and I remember seeing a lot of books on the shelves. And it was like a typical classroom type setup with desks, old-time wooden desks. And I walked in and I sat down. I looked on the wall, and there was the alphabet, the entire alphabet. And I said, wow, man, I just wonder if I can learn that. You know, and I had confidence that I can. I told myself, yeah, you can learn that, plus a whole bunch of other stuff, you know.
Yeah, I guess I didn't expect him to take to the setting so much.
He really did, but there was one problem. The nuns. He says he witnessed their violence towards the kids really early on. There was even a nun that the kids nicknamed Bruiser.
Wherein when I would hear this negative energy coming out of her, I would have to tell myself, turn off the volume. In my mind, there's an up and down button that's on and off, okay? And what do I do when it's off? I take a look at the wall. I study the the alphabet. That's the way I defended myself.
It's wild that even at this early age, he had his own coping techniques.
Then she'd get her revenge again, you know what I mean? I remember sitting there looking right at her, man, and looking at the punch coming at me. Didn't move me at all. Absorbed the punch, fell down, whatever, got back up, sat right back down, more peaceful than ever.
In second grade, this was all still going on, so some of the students decided they had enough.
My buddy in the back of the room, he opened up the window, and 5 or 6 of us dove out the window, scratched ourselves up, bleeding and stuff, and we ran away. And we ran into the forest, ran to our old trail. And we would meet there. We were all beat up. Some of these guys, blood all over the place, you know what I mean? And then would meet there, and then would sit around and would talk about what happened and how we felt as a form of healing.
Again, this picture is incredible and so tragic that they found these ways to process going through all of this at such a young age. He did say that his Menominee practices had a lot to do with saving him at this time too, but still.
That was his life until high school, just trying to survive every day as a child. He wants to give credit where credit is due, though, because he says none of this would be possible without 3 entities: the federal government, the tribe, and the Archdiocese of Green Bay. They all were complicit in the abuse.
He was very clear on that. All right, so he gets out of boarding school, thankfully, and he starts high school in Shawano, Wisconsin, and he experiences a ton of racism. And this is where he goes to his guidance counselor for guidance.
And I was so sick of it by then. I walked in the counselor's room one day and I says, Mr. Counselor, I have an idea that I have to tell you about. And he says, what's that? I told him, I says, I'm going to be 17 years old in so many months. After that, I'm out of here. I don't want nothing to do with school, education, indoctrination, nothing. And he says, well, okay. You would think that a counselor would counsel somebody who was saying something like that, you know, and try not persuade him. But that's the level of racism that I had to deal with at that time.
Dewey struggled for a while after dropping out. First, he says he moved around the state. Then he joined the Air Force. Even tried his best to assimilate into white culture that surrounded him.
Yeah, it feels like that time was really important for him just to kind of like experience the world and find himself, which ultimately led him back into tribal teachings. And that's kind of where everything changed because he found this mentor, an elder he worked with who led these ceremonies.
At that age of 30, he told me one day, he says, I want you to sit down on the side of me, sit next to me. He says, you can learn what you want from the ceremonies. Very brilliant, simplistic old man. I didn't know I was going to become his assistant. That blew me away, man. It blew me away completely. He spoke in a ceremony one time in front of the people. He says, if I'm not here, he says, this man here will slide over into my chair.
This man, these ceremonies really changed Dewey's life. They led him back to what was important to him.
I should conclude with that part of that, because that is something that not too many people can understand, why I talk about my total relief from Christianity and from Catholicism was by my acceptance of these customs and traditions of my people. And it worked.
What he's talking about here is forgiveness. Forgiveness is what opened up his path to healing from his past experiences. He started living a new life, a healthier life. He started competing in track events, traveling across the state. He rode his bike across the country. He still rides every single day. He even ran for human rights.
He was running everywhere all the time. I think it's interesting because on one of those runs, it led him to a very unexpected place.
A gravesite next to the Catholic Church on the reservation. Matter of fact, the gravesite was in the back of the church, and my trail was right by the gravesites.
Okay, so basically he says his ancestors directed him to an unmarked gravesite at St. Michael's Church in Kashina.
They were trying to get out of the hole, and they said, Dewey, we need your help. We can't get out of this hole. We need you to help us. And that was like going through my mind. And I didn't know what to think at the moment, so I took my tobacco, my offering, and I put it on the ground. I says, okay, I will. I'll help you.
There was a whole investigation, which a local station in Green Bay reported on. And while the church said they wanted to be of assistance, they didn't apologize. But Dewey says he was there when Bishop Ricken of the church acknowledged the trauma caused by the church.
He got up and spoke in front of the people in the church, and he says, after consideration of what some tribal members mentioned to me, he says, we're going to have a little ceremony out in the back of the church for those people. He came through, Jimmy. The bishop came through for me, Maria. He said he did what he said he was going to do.
It's estimated that nearly 1,000 kids died in Indian boarding schools all over the nation. The truth is, though, we don't know the exact numbers of how many children actually suffered at these schools. The numbers are probably much larger. Record keeping wasn't the best, and there really was no incentive to do so.
Mm-hmm.
At least 14 of these schools were here in Wisconsin, working to kill the Indian and save the man. Dewey says he forgave the church, but still, he had someone else to forgive. His parents.
I had some anger at him one time because I wasn't getting the proper protection from these things that were going on. I had some anger over that. I found out that they themselves went through the Kill the Indian, Save the Man program when they were younger in their lives. And Jimmy, I cried. I cried over that. Everybody in my family was impacted in a real profound way that created sibling rivalry, confusion, every aberration of the psychological mindset that we had at that time was impacted by Kill the Indian, Save the Man. So we had a lot of work to do between ourselves in order for us to love. That's something that was taken from my family.
All right, if we're just going to go down a checklist with all this history. So Governor Evers has apologized for the role Wisconsin had in these schools. At the time, then President Biden apologized for the role the U.S. government had in the schools. The Department of Interior even started a 3-year investigation into the impact of these schools.
There have been oral history projects making sure these stories are documented.
I mean, that's kind of how we found out about Dewey, and that's a bit of the work we're doing here.
And also, a while back, the UN made a declaration affirming the equal rights of Indigenous people.
There's a lot to say about genocide. I don't like thinking about genocide, but I have to, because I have to know how to prevent it. The declaration that the United Nations made in the recent years protects indigenous rights. To what degree, I don't know. Just the knowledge of the United Nations having this document in place gives me great hope, gives me a whole lot of hope. Why? Because we need people in the world to know that we are a sovereign nation, and we're a sovereign nation from day one.
When we met Dewey, he rode his bike down to see us. And for his age, I was blown away by how active he was.
I mean, it was a hot day, and he wasn't out of breath or anything. He was ready to go. It was pretty wild.
That man has no stops. But aside from just how physically healthy he is, he's also very spiritually healthy.
He's been through it, and he's come out the other side. I think what's undeniable, too, talking with him and listening to him, is that he clearly appreciates all of it.
Yeah, the good and the bad.
And if I can just mention that after I do my morning offering, it's like the Spirit tells me, okay, Dewey, I got your tobacco. Now, go right ahead. Go enjoy your day. Go on, ride your bike. You know what I mean? That satisfied feeling of having been given the permission to live from day to day to day. You know, and that's all I take, a day at a time, man, you know. And it works. It works real good, you know. Love every minute of it, you know.
That was Wisconsin residential school survivor Dewey Shanador. He spoke with WUWM reporter Jimmy Gutierrez and Eric Vaughn fellow Maria Peralta Ariano last year. And that wraps up today's show. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take us on the go, simply download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tune into Lake Effect tomorrow at noon to hear some of the top stories from the week. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.